Born in the United States, and in 2003, after a trip to Medjugorje, she began to receive what you would call locutions from Jesus, and she wrote these locutions down, and they became known as the volumes. And all her locutions, by the way, she's under her spiritual direction. She has her own spiritual director, Father Dara Conley, and she's in obedience to her bishop, Bishop Leo Riley. And all her writings are sent to Rome for approval. So it comes under private revelation. So all her writings are sent to Rome for approval, so that there's nothing just to check that there's nothing in contradiction with church doctrine or faith or morals or teaching. So everything that she's written is tightly scrutinized. So I know a lot of people wonder, oh gosh, a private revelation, and it's disapproved by the church. So what the church does is that it tightly examines all of revelations, and that in this case all her writings have been very strictly scrutinized. And so I know some people were asking the question, is this okay, and is this so? It's within private revelation, but all of her writings, in fact, I discovered her writings through a friend of mine, Sister Bridge McKenna, had asked me a number of years ago, and she'd asked me just, had I heard of Anne, and I said no, and G&T, Gemma and Trina very kindly gave me some of the books, and I found them most consoling. And I said, this great message of hope and great message of encouragement in them, which was nearly in the face of all the doom and gloom round of, so that I got great hope and encouragement out of this. And 3 weeks ago, Father Cahill and myself met and Father Dara up in Ballyborough. And just at the end of the meeting, Anne turned to me and said, she gave me a sense. She says, I feel in prayer to say this to you. And what she said to me was that not another sinner in the world could have known or would have been aware of, and I can share that with you. It was coming up to the conference, that the conference is always a busy time. And coupled with that, we had our European friends coming over from different countries in Europe. And myself, I sensed a great feeling of being, which I didn't even share with my own spiritual director, Father Cahill, which I hadn't shared with anybody. I felt a great feeling within myself of being overwhelmed by all of this happening so close to one another. The European meeting we could take in our stride at any time, but 2 days before the conference, this was a lot of work. And interiorly, I felt greatly overwhelmed by the whole lot. And Anne turned and said to me privately at the end of the meeting, she says, I feel God wants to say to you that you're not to be overwhelmed by the amount of work that's coming by the European meeting and the conference, that, you're just to do one task at a time. It's His work. He has it all in hand, and He'll give you the grace as you need it for each task. And that was exactly as it was. And the other thing she says, and whatever you do, will you get to bed early? It helps. So it's very, very, very astute advice. But as I said, not another person would have known that under the wide earthly sun but myself and God, of course, And out she came and put words on what was going on in my own heart, and the wisdom and the peace that I got afterwards from it. I felt, that's okay, kind of everything will be fine. And Father Patrice did all the work for the European conference, so that took all that off my plate. So it was great the way it worked out. But just to share that with you on a personal level, especially for people that are wondering and having doubts and such, that's just my own personal experience. And as I said, nobody, only God and myself are privy to that information. Okay, so please put your hands together for Anne, the lay apostle.
How are you doing? This is a happy day, isn't it? Jesus has assembled us together with a little help from St. Faustina to celebrate His mercy. Bishop Walsh spoke so beautifully. He said about the Spirit in the Word meeting the Spirit in the heart. And isn't that our lifelong process? And then Father Patrice spoke so beautifully about discovering God's mercy and then rediscovering God's mercy. And today, the first thing I'm going to do is stick to the schedule, because I don't want to be the one who messes up Don's schedule. But I'm going to talk about perspective. And now, some people would view a cup, and they would say, this cup is half full. Some people would view the same cup, and they would say, this cup is half empty. People do this with material goods, and they may say, I don't have enough. Another person might say, I have plenty. We can also do this with people. One person could say, now that's a fine man doing the best he can. And another person could say, that's a terrible man. He's a disaster. It's all about perspective. Now, as Christians, you and I spend our lives trying to adapt our perspective to the Lord's, to Jesus Christ. If we are to authentically be apostles, we have to have a perspective that matches Jesus's. Now, I often think about the word apostle, and you and I are chosen, called to be apostles. And I looked it up in Webster's dictionary. An apostle is a person sent by another, a messenger, an envoy. We are each sent by Christ to be Christ in this world, in this time, wherever He has placed us. We have to think often now. That's the one part of it, is the service that we provide for the kingdom, what we do. But then we have to think of the second part of this. How about the first apostles? How did they relate to Jesus? They listened to Jesus. They spent time with Jesus. They learned from Jesus. And this is where you and I can make sure that the Spirit matches the Word. We have to spend time with Jesus. So then I looked up another word. We each need to be disciples. We need to be disciples if we're going to take on the mind of Christ. So now, how is a disciple defined? A scholar. A disciple is a scholar, a learning soul, a little learning soul who is willing to understand that he always has to be with Jesus to learn Jesus. So we make a lifetime commitment to learning about holiness, always going deeper and deeper into the concepts of holiness. Now, where do we learn holiness the most? Where do we really get holy? With the people closest to us, in our vocations, in our daily service. And sometimes we forget that that is where the Lord sent us. We are a messenger. We are sent by another. Now, I know a man, and he's a husband and a farmer. And if you know anything about farmers, they get up in the morning and they move, don't they? They hit the ground running because they have animals to look after, important agendas, things to do. But I watched this man live his life, and he's busy. But if his children or his wife need him, he stops what he's doing. He's completely in his vocation. And he doesn't, now he's doing that for love of his wife and children, yes? I mean, that's clear. He loves his wife and children. But this man has found his place in God's kingdom. He does this for Jesus. This is where Christ has planted him, and this is where he blooms. If we lose our commitment to our vocations, we've lost the plot. We have to be always thinking about my holiness will be found in the daily commitment to my vocation. Now we are sent by another. Where's Jesus sending us, you and I? Consider this when we wake up tomorrow morning. Where is Jesus Christ sending us to serve? Is it into the kitchen? Is it into an office? Is it into a church? The key, it doesn't matter where it is. The key is we remember that we are sent by another every moment of every day. And it is a lifelong process to really absorb God's perspective and authentically deliver it to the world each day. But that is what we are called to do. Now, we accept that when we're dealing with humanity, you're always going to find messes, aren't you? Our humanity, the Lord takes delight in his people. Jesus has factored in our flawed humanity to the plan. But the distortions that we can see can disturb us. And so we see distortions in others, and that's fine. We're going to talk about judging. But today, or this weekend, let's ask Jesus to illuminate in each one of us for ourselves where we might be presenting a distorted version of an apostle. Do you understand what I mean? Where are we getting it wrong? Now, I know we're getting a lot right because we're all here seeking Jesus. Isn't that true? We're here because we love Jesus and we are seeking him more and more. And that's good. I'm just saying, for myself, I want to be able to examine myself honestly each day and look for these distortions. Okay, what are some distortions of holiness? Competitive holiness. Have you ever experienced someone who competes with you for holiness? Do you ever feel competitive that someone's holier than you? This is just a sign of an immature spirituality. But we got to look at that. Holiness is not a competitive sport. It's personal. It's between Jesus Christ and the person. And only Jesus Christ can judge the condition of a soul. Only Jesus Christ knows exactly why a soul is doing what it's doing or making the mistakes. Why is a person making certain mistakes? Jesus knows. He has the full picture. And you and I don't have a complete picture of anybody, even the people we live with. So we simply can't judge. Okay, distortions in holiness could be disunity. And I'm going to talk about unity because Jesus really needs unity in his church now. He needs each of us apostles to work to further the cause of unity in our hearts, where it begins, in our families, and in our church. Another distortion of holiness is the abuse of power. Sometimes people get power and they abuse it. And this is a terrible distortion of holiness. And it really wounds, doesn't it? Because people who don't have the power feel so helpless and vulnerable. So that's another distortion of holiness. So we're going to ask Jesus to help us because we understand Jesus doesn't lead with condemnation. Jesus leads with mercy, always. So we want to make sure in our hearts, our families, and our other movements, we want to make sure that we're leading with mercy. Only then are we authentically representing Jesus. Every conversation about anyone, we lead with mercy. We have to be disciplined. The holiest people I know, and I know some very holy people, refuse to condemn. They won't do it. They simply won't do it. Sometimes it's entertaining because you say now, okay, clearly they can't find a good thing to say about this person. They will. They will not condemn. They'll make excuses. They'll say, sure, we don't know all the facts. We don't know, who knows what it's like to be in his shoes. We don't know what caused him to be this way. It's saintly. And that's where we want to be. We don't want to. I think if any one of us in this room were told we were judgmental, I think it would hurt us. I think we would say, I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want that to be me. I want to not be judgmental. So, the desire is good. Now let's talk a little bit more about this. Okay. What does the Catechism say about judging? See, in our apostolate, one of the things we do is we seek answers from the Catechism all the time. Because as Catholics, we don't know it very well. And it's hard to defend the faith when you're not quite sure really what it says. So the Catechism says about judging, although we can judge that an act is in itself a grave offense, we must entrust judgment of persons to the justice and mercy of God. Although we can judge that an act is in itself a grave offense, we must entrust judgment of persons to the justice and mercy of God. When I first read it, I laughed because it talks about a grave offense. And the first thing I thought of was, we don't need a grave offense to judge somebody. We'll judge somebody for going the wrong way in the school parking lot. Do you know what I mean? But he says, so now what is he really saying? He's saying, we can say that lying is wrong, but we cannot make a judgment against anyone who lies. We can say that stealing is wrong, but we cannot make a judgment against somebody who steals. Indeed, we can say that judging is wrong, but we cannot make a judgment against everyone who judges. This is important. Father Tady Doyle wrote a beautiful piece on this where he nailed it in the curate's diary. And he said he had found himself judgers. Do you know what I mean? And I think this judgment thing is like a door that swings both ways in a hotel kitchen. It hits somebody going in and it hits somebody else on the other side of the door. People are hurt by the cruel judgments of others, and then they themselves are led into judging the ones who hurt them. So it's like the chicken pox. It spreads. So we want to stop this. Now, in our church, we have many beautiful movements of the Spirit. And the way I can see all these beautiful movements flow up through the bishops, through the Holy Father, and into heaven if we're Catholic. And God flows down beautiful, magnificent graces through the Holy Father, through the bishops, and into the faithful. It is up to us to be lined up to this chair of Peter through our bishops. God is not going to move the chair because I have some idea. Do you know? We have to conform. And there are times in your life where you might disagree with a church teaching. In my life, I've found when that happens that I didn't understand completely what the church actually taught. And then when I got the knowledge, I understood the beauty of God's plan. So if we have a problem with church teaching, it's us who needs to examine it and hopefully move into the stream of the Holy Spirit. Now, I'll tell you for some perspective about judging. I'll tell you a story about a little boy. This little boy, and this is kind of a downer. I don't mean to make anyone sad, but we do judge, so let's look at this objectively. This little boy was in school. He was 8 years old, and the teachers at the school noticed that his hair had got very long, and he didn't cut it. And he was very pretty, as a lot of little boys are, and so he looked like a little girl. So the teachers were just annoyed by this, and they said, "What's wrong with this mother? How can she let her son go around like this? She probably doesn't care about this little boy. Is she any kind of mother at all? She must be on drugs." Blah, 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 blah. The judgments went on and on and on against this mother. Nobody went for the father, you'll note. They went right for the mother. Just an observation. So, one day, the little boy came into school, and his hair was cut in a boy's haircut. And one of the teachers said, "Oh, your mother cut your hair. Why did she do that?" And he said, my grandfather died of cancer. And when the grandfather was dying of cancer, they explained it to the little boy, and he saw that his grandfather lost his hair. So they told him about this, and there were children with this cancer, and they also lost their hair. And there's an organization that you can donate your hair to for the kids who have cancer. It's called Locks for Love. So this little boy was bound and determined he was going to donate his hair to this organization for some little girl or boy who had lost their hair. Well, the teachers felt terrible. They felt terrible. And it was a good opportunity for them to examine how far this judgment had taken them. There's a couple things we can think of. This is what helps me as far as judging people. A long time ago, I decided, wow, this is too hard. The only way to handle this is to view everybody like God does, from God's perspective. Now, how does God view you and I, every person? He views each one of us as a child. So once I began to think of everybody as a little boy or a little girl, making mistakes possibly or doing well, I was able to stop judging them. So that's what helps me. The other thing that's good is when you are tempted to judge somebody, make a case for them. Make a case for them in your head. Make a defense for them. This is what holy people do. I'm telling you, it's the truth. And say, well, we don't know what could have happened. Maybe this, maybe that. There could be reasons. Let's leave it there, I'll tell you about, I was working with a woman, an Italian woman, and she was having great difficulty with a family member, a man, who was hurting her. And she just was really angry. And I said, here, look, why don't you view him as a little boy? Try to think of him as just a little boy, and maybe it will help you. And she said, yes, I will think of him as a boy, a bad, bad boy. So she was getting there. At least with a bad, bad boy, you'll be more merciful than a bad, bad man. Judging is an obstacle to unity in our hearts, in our families, and in our holy organizations. One of the prayers of the faithful the other day, a couple weeks ago, was, don't let Christian tradition be a cause for disunity among Christians. When we look at other organizations, the beautiful representation of the Holy Spirit out in the hallway out there, all these beautiful movements, alive, living representations of God's mercy to us. If you're tempted to judge an organization, stop yourself and say, what exactly are they getting right? Because there'll be things they're getting right, and rejoice in what they're getting right. The other thing is, for the sake of unity, we all have to be willing to absorb a little hurt. Every husband or wife knows this. Every nun or priest living in community knows this. For the sake of unity, we have to absorb a little hurt. We have big hearts filled with God's love. We can take a little hurt. Offer it back to the Lord. You look at the crucifix, how much pain he absorbed for us. We can absorb a little pain for Jesus. Now, I want to talk about, how much time, Father Dare? I haven't a clue. 10 minutes left. Okay. All right. I'll talk about this. We want to talk about storing up treasures. And in this time, in the world, we have a few problems. One of them being a worldwide economic downturn, a recession. So this is why we're talking about it. Okay, now I'll tell you the first story. It's about a little boy fighting with his sister over money. And there was money found in the house. And this little fella believed it belonged to him. And the girl objected. So this broke into a fight, a physical fight. So it was my children. So I separated them both. And I said to my son, what are you doing fighting over money? And he said, well, I want it. I said, but it's not yours. This isn't, he said, but this is a good thing I want. I said, why do you want this so badly? And he was very patient with me. He said, Mom, it's not the money, it's what it can buy. I said, oh, I see. He didn't, so that was fine. So I explained to him. Now, I said, you can't think so much about money, because this one likes money. I said, you have to think about storing up your treasures in heaven. You have to think about, I said, every time, he said, well, what is that? I said, every time you're nice to somebody, every time you're kind, every time you share, every time you don't hit back when you're hurt, Jesus takes a little treasure in heaven and he puts it in your box. And he saves it for you there. Well, he liked this. He got this concept, and he was like, that is good. So for the next couple days, he went around doing nice things and sharing and trying to be good. So a couple days go by, and two of the girls broke into a fight about something, and he's sitting back, and he had this smile on his face. I said, what are you smiling at? He said, I'm thinking about all my treasures in heaven. And I said, that's wonderful. He goes, yeah. And he goes, and I'm thinking, if I were God, I would take stuff out of the box if people were bad. So I'm thinking the girls aren't going to have anything, and I'll win. So we had competitive holiness in embryo. The next story I want to tell you is about a woman on the street. And one day, years ago, way before this mission, I was in front of a hospital where a family member was seriously, critically ill. And I was feeling very bereft, as one does, and it was very dark, and it was very cold, well below zero. And I sat there thinking about Jesus, and you always say, Lord, where are you in this? And of course, he's right there. But there's a feeling of isolation at times and pain that Christ allows. Anyway, I sat there, and this woman walked by me, and she was a very big woman. And she had a big, huge fur hat on, and she had a huge, colorful coat, and these bags, carrying a bunch of bags. She did not look like she had a lot of money. So she went past me, and then she stopped abruptly. And she came back to me. And she said, honey, what's wrong with you? And I thought, oh, no, I just didn't want to do that. I said, the family member is sick. Well, she drops her bags, puts her hand over my head, and starts praying for me out loud. Now, I was brought up Catholic. This isn't how we did it. We prayed quietly in form. We prayed the rosary, and you had a conversation with Jesus. It was personal. Not this woman. She began to pray and really implore Jesus to help me. And she said, Jesus, I don't like this. She looks sad, and I know you're here, Jesus. And she began to do this huge blessing over me, and I was dying 1,000 deaths of embarrassment. People were beginning to gather to see what was going on. She was a flamboyant character, and I thought, only me, this would only happen to me. And then she said, Jesus, I'll stay here all night until you bless her. I will stay here all night. So then I began to pray. I said, Jesus, give her what she wants. In the name of all that's good, make this end. And then suddenly, I felt a wash of warm grace go from my head all the way down through my body. And in that moment, I knew that I was loved, and I knew that God was with me. I was certain of his presence and of his love. And in my soul, I began to praise Jesus spontaneously. Now, there's probably words for all this. I still don't know what they are. But I think a priest told me the other day, that was a Pentecostal blessing you got. So it was very beautiful. Okay, the third story. There was a priest dying in our diocese. And this man had served his whole priesthood in the diocese. He was not a missionary priest. He had served quietly and faithfully. And as he was dying, I was praying and praying for him. And he had no possessions. He wasn't, didn't have a lot of possessions or anything. And in my heart, I was I didn't want him to suffer, and I was just considering this. And the Lord allowed me to see the magnificence of the graces he had given to the kingdom through the service of one priest, this man. And I understood that this man had given constantly from heaven's treasure through the power of the sacraments, through his ministry to people around him. And I could see that this man's treasure was walking around in cities he had never seen, in the people he had ministered to. I was dazzled. I was dazzled by what God had done in one priest who never served outside the diocese. In the first story, a boy learns what treasure is. In the second story, a woman shares freely of a treasure the world doesn't even identify. And in the third story, I saw a priest going to claim his treasure. Now, I'll tell you this. People in the world are feeling like they've lost their treasure because they've lost money and jobs, insecurity. They're afraid. I don't blame them. I have children too. I understand. But in this time, as apostles, we're called to do two things. Number one, if we ourselves have lost jobs or money or security, we have to be an example. Let Jesus console us and be an example because people are paying attention. We have to live our trust in Jesus, not our doubts. Live our trust. Show people what it looks like. People in this time urgently need to see good examples of living Catholicism. We are each called, we are sent by another. It's important that we do this. And secondly, we are called to console those who may have lost jobs or money or security. We're called to be compassionate listeners. Jesus gives charisms for each time, and I'm preparing to close. I know that we're out of time. The Lord gives whatever's needed in a given time, Jesus sends. The Father knows what the children need. The Father prepares the perfect package of graces for a time. So the charisms are here. Okay, what am I seeing that is popping up in movements all over? Compassionate listening as a call. Jesus doesn't need compassionate talkers. He needs compassionate listeners. We don't have to fix people's problems. We can't. But we can listen to them and be with them in their fear or in their pain. The Lord badly needs unity in the church at this time. The renewal, God has this plan for this renewal. It is taking place. It's coming. We're all part of it. But he needs unity. So we all have to seriously work for unity. And then we also need to learn the catechism of our faith. We need to understand what being a Catholic means. Now, there's always a holy perspective. No matter what happens, heaven has a perspective. Now, we're suffering from these financial distresses, but every generation gets something. We only have to look back on history to see how other people have suffered. Isn't it true? I mean, I wasn't brought up taking airplane trips. There were 8 of us. That would have been a joke if I had said to our parents, we'd like you to take us on a family airplane trip. I mean, that just didn't happen. It won't hurt us to lose a little wealth. Tomorrow, we'll talk specifically about some of those things, about unity in the church. And I think that Bishop Walsh is going to touch on a situation occurring here in Dublin, this clergy abuse report that's going to come out. And, we'll deal with it. What we'll do is we'll look at the situation from heaven's perspective. Heaven has a perfect perspective that is truth. And all together, we'll look at it. Can we handle this as a church in Ireland? Of course we can. Of course we can. When you have humanity, you're going to have messes. And in families, everybody helps, and we get through the difficult times. And we become, when the church has difficulties like that, we'll see a holier, more purified, humbler, church emerge. That's what we want. That's what God is. It's a purification of the church. Now, each of us is going to have to look at our role. I was talking to somebody who is dealing with these, not in Ireland, far away from here in America. And someone said to him, he was dealing with abuse victims day after day after day because he felt he had to meet each one personally. He said, they need to look in my eyes and have me say, I'm sorry for what happened. And this was hard for him, but he was doing it. And one of his associates said to him, boy, I just can't wait till this is all over so we can get on with our ministry. And he said, this is our ministry. We have leadership in our church doing a fine job, beautiful job, but they can lead. Jesus can send good leaders, but you and I have to follow. And you and I have each been called to serve in our Catholic Church in Ireland in this time. We also, this is our ministry. So we'll examine that a little more tomorrow. And God bless you all. God bless you.
When we got our theme, it's taken from the Gospel of St. Luke. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke.